Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service, and we try to do this each evening through a unique partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is Sunday, October 2nd, 2022. And if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide in this broadcast, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online present. It'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii in the lower left there. And when you click on the map, it'll bring up the forecast along with any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories. And there's all sorts of other information you can pull off this site. Today, looking at the continental U.S., we can see in the northeast, the areas of blue indicate frost advisories across parts of Michigan in through the northeast. Purple areas along the mid-Atlantic coast from New Jersey south through Virginia. Our storm warnings and high surf advisories as a result of storminess there that lingers along the eastern seaboard. But at least here in Alaska, we're going to be keeping an eye on things. Right now, there is a high surf advisory in effect until 4 o'clock Monday afternoon for Kuskokwim Bay. Now, we're anticipating water levels to be a few feet above normal high tide. We had the high tide this Sunday morning, and we observed water levels in some areas there 2-3 feet above normal. And we expect that again with Monday morning's early high tide sometime there around 5-6 a.m. Drier, warmer weather is anticipated for the Panhandle, along with some areas of morning fog. A southern Panhandle could see temperatures in the 60s next 2-3 afternoons, given much warmer air aloft over that area. We are still monitoring the potential for a strong storm crossing eastern Russia October 5th, 6th. It's going to spread a frontal system eastward in through the northern Bering and Chukchi Seas that could impact areas of the west central and northwest coast of Alaska here mid to late week. So stay tuned to later forecasts, and I'll highlight a little bit more of that coming up. Areas that could be affected by that eastern Russian storm and frontal system will be Point Hope on up toward Utqiagvik. Right now, clear skies this afternoon around 2 p.m., 37 degrees. Shaktoolik, the east end of Norton Sound, also could see southeast to south winds turning southwesterly there with the passage of that front later on this week. Right now, though, enjoying clear skies, 41 degrees, and wishing everyone there along Norton Sound the very best in your efforts to try to recover from the historic storm of a couple weeks ago and get as much done as you can before the freeze-up and winter sets in. Further south and west, Kipnuk along Kuskokwim Bay, partly cloudy skies, 48 degrees, and again, you could see water levels along the coast there, a few feet higher than normal high tide early Monday morning as the result of a weakening low-pressure system that's moved up toward Kuskokwim Bay. That was the same storm that back late Thursday and Friday produced hurricane-force winds over the far western Aleutians. And then Haines getting some breaks in the cloud cover, drying out a bit, 54 degrees after experiencing some flooding there in the northern Panhandle Friday and early Saturday. Conditions are gradually improving there. So we have a special weather statement in blue there for along the west central northwest coast, including St. Lawrence Island. These are the areas that could be impacted by the stronger winds, elevated surf, potentially a storm surge of some sort, especially there along the Chukchi Sea coast. Again, we're trying to be more sensitive to those areas around Norton Sound, given that recent historic storm. Those areas are more vulnerable to wind and waves than they would have been if they had not had that storm. The other thing is this system could prevent the ice from setting up as it might normally do here. It would be quite disruptive. And then we still have the high surf advisory down there along Kuskokwim Bay until Monday afternoon, where we anticipate water levels to be maybe a few feet above normal with high tide early Monday morning. So along the Arctic coast there, the northwest coast, especially from the Bering Strait on up to Utqiagvik, this system is going to bring southeast to south winds that'll veer southwest to west following the frontal passage. and this could lead to potentially some sort of coastal flooding as a result of the wind and wave action. And then along Norton Sound, we'll have to keep an eye on, because that area there is more, could see some elevated surf as a result of those winds. So again, we want to just kind of give people a heads up here, so we'll have more information coming out as we go through this week on the specifics, the timing, and the areas that will most likely be impacted by this storm system. Another thing, a little while back, we've been so busy with other things, the 2022 Arctic sea ice minimum was declared to have occurred on September 18th, and of note, it was the 10th least ice coverage, tied with 2018 and 2017. And the other notable thing is the past 16 years, going back to 2007, have had the lowest ice coverage since we've been using really satellite records to measure the ice extent and things. So that's rather noteworthy. But looking at satellite imagery, we continue to see the one system, the low that's coming in north of the central Aleutians with the enhanced clouds. Still some areas of lingering precipitation south central, especially along south of the Alaska Range. And at least a little better conditions have improved, a little drying there across the Panhandle, especially southern areas. And a fair amount of clearing there in the west, Seward Peninsula around Norton Sound up to the north along the Arctic coast. So enjoy that. And for this afternoon, we have that weakening low moving up into Kuskokwim Bay, southeast corner of the Bering, the other low back there toward the central Bering, passing north of the Aleutians, and that's going to slide southeastward across the tip of the Alaska Peninsula as we go into Monday night and Tuesday. That low will continue to keep some rain and breezier conditions going across the Aleutians, the Alaska Peninsula. Meanwhile, high pressure out over the Panhandle should bring at least some drier, a little better weather, though you may have to contend with some early morning fog the next couple of mornings with that high pressure in place. That one low will then slide off toward the southeast into the North Pacific, well south of Kodiak Island in the Alaska Peninsula, but you can see hints of that Russian system showing up on the far upper left of your screen with a warm front. Initially, there's going to be a warmer push of air and some stronger southeast to south winds following that before a cold front or occluded front works its way into the west side of the state later on this week. So temperatures, lows generally in the 40s across much of the south, including the Panhandle. High temperatures Monday afternoon could squeak out above 60 degrees there, the southern Panhandle. At least lower to mid-50s many other spots, including even up toward Anchorage Bowl, Talkeetna. Tuesday morning lows generally in the 40s in the Panhandle, some 30s across the southern interior, Copper River Basin, and then temperatures Tuesday afternoon could be as warm as 65 there at Craig. And off to the west, generally lower to maybe mid-50s. We are going to see a bit of a warming trend ahead of that Russian system here across the southern and eastern parts of the state. So expect a little warmer temperatures midweek, Wednesday, Thursday, maybe even lingering into Friday. Morning lows below freezing, some teens showing up there like Arctic Village and Atuvik Pass. And then for Monday afternoon, temperatures generally in the 40s south of the Brooks Range, still below freezing though along the Arctic coast, North Slope. And Tuesday morning lows, we are anticipating temperatures below freezing many areas across the interior and in the north, but around Norton Sound, at least readings should hold upper 30s to around 40 degrees, still above freezing there. And Tuesday afternoon, get some temperatures back up around or a bit above 50 Fairbanks as you head down toward McGrath and those areas, otherwise 40 south of the Brooks Range. And across the southwest interior Monday morning, above freezing temperatures, upper 30s to lower 40s, otherwise mid-40s common, extending out through the Aleutian chain. Monday afternoon highs should generally be back up around or just above 50, Bethel on through Dillingham, King Salmon down along the length of the Alaska Peninsula, and Tuesday morning lows generally above 40 across much of the southwest interior and extending out through the Aleutians with high temperatures Tuesday afternoon, many areas getting back up around and up into at least the lower, perhaps a few spots, even mid-50s. And the temperature outlook October 8th through the 12th is calling for near normal temperatures throughout the central west side of the state, above normal temperatures along the Alcan border, and especially through the Panhandle. As we go toward mid-month, we'll start to cool down in the west, still above normal temperatures expected across the Panhandle there in the southeast. And precipitation is going to average potentially much above normal east central areas toward the Alcan border October 8th through the 12th, and that trend will continue going into mid-month. So don't anticipate to see much of a relief from a rather wet pattern that we've been seeing.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Let's take a look now at your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned early this week, we are watching low pressure passing through the lower Bering Sea. It's heading east-southeastward. It'll be located just east of the eastern Aleutians Monday morning before cutting southeastward across the tip of the Alaska Peninsula and down into the North Pacific. We have a couple of large areas of IFR, one out over the Gulf and another back toward the Pribilof Islands, including St. Paul. Other than that, conditions have improved to VFR across much of the northern half of the state, along with some colder temperatures, and a lot of NVFR conditions anticipated areas south and along the Gulf Coast. For Monday afternoon, we see a large area of IFR conditions from St. Paul, south of Nunavik Island up there, especially in through the eastern Aleutians and the western portion of the Alaska Peninsula, with MVFR conditions along and south of the Brooks Range through much of the west coast and west interior, as well as along the Gulf Coast. For Tuesday morning, we anticipate MVFR conditions continuing across much of the west half of the state and also the western Gulf, including Cook Inlet and Prince William Sound, perhaps a pocket of IFR conditions there in the Talkeetna, eastern Talkeetna Mountains, and then way out to the west, warm front associated with the next storm system moving into eastern Russia will create IFR conditions across the Bering, which will spread eastward across the Bering Tuesday afternoon. Otherwise, MVFR conditions will continue across areas of the west down into over the Gulf, but much of the central and eastern interior along the Alcan border should enjoy VFR conditions. Anaktuvik Pass on Monday should generally see VFR conditions become MVFR. Atigun Pass, VFR conditions also becoming MVFR as we go through the day. Further south and west, we expect MVFR conditions to hold at Lake Clark and Merrill, as well as at Rainy Pass. And as we round up through the central Alaska Range, Windy Pass should also generally see MVFR conditions. And then Isabel Pass, MVFR becoming VFR. And it's looking like the same thing with Tasta Pass, MVFR conditions in the morning giving way to VFR. And Tanita Pass, look for MVFR conditions to prevail throughout the day on Monday. As well as at Portage Pass, we expect MVFR conditions to prevail there on Monday, as well as in the north end of the Panhandle at Chilkoot and White. And looking at freezing levels, surface freezing line has come down in areas if there's been any breaks in the cloud cover or due to higher elevation. Extends down through the middle Yukon Valley and down into the southeast interior mountains. Otherwise, freezing levels aloft remains around 2,000 feet across the Seward Peninsula and middle Yukon Valley, and upwards around 4,000 feet along the northern Gulf Coast, eastern Kenai to the upper end of the Alaska Peninsula. Freezing levels aloft are still up around 10,000 feet in the southern Panhandle, and we expect that to generally hold here for the day. Monday, off and taking a look at icing threats. The greatest one will be around the precipitation and thicker cloud cover associated with the low that's there in the lower Bering north of the eastern Aleutians. 8,000 to 16,000 feet, there could be some moderate icing. And then falling off to 7,000 to 14,000 feet across the southwest back toward the Kenai, Prince William Sound, and then in the northeast corner of the state and into northwest Canada, 3,000 to 12,000 feet there. Upper level jet stream winds, we have a strong jet core in excess of 120 to 130 knots riding down from Asia into the central Aleutians, generally out of the northwest, with a low pressure circulation at 30,000 feet situated there just in the lower Bering, and then a pretty good high up along the Arctic northwest coast. And at 700 millibars, 9,000 feet, we see that high along the Arctic coast at 9,000 feet, and low pressure circulation still sitting there over the lower Bering just north of the eastern Aleutians, with broadest winds 50-60 knots out of the northwest extending through the central and western Aleutians. And as we bring it down to 3,000 feet, we have that low continue to sit in that location. It is a vertically stacked system with southwest winds ahead of it into the middle upper Alaska Peninsula, and winds of 50 to 60 knots there from areas of the eastern and central Aleutians on the backside of the low. This will translate to a good likelihood of considerable moderate turbulence along the Aleutians up in through the Alaska Peninsula and areas of the southwest coast around Bristol Bay. Surface to 3,000 and surface to 4,000 feet.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and joining us here today is Eric Stevens from the Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, GINA for short. And Eric, you frequently come on the show to tell us about these really cool things that we're doing with satellites over Alaska and how we can use these really awesome tools. But I'm thinking all the while there has to be a mad scientist somewhere working on the next cool thing in the satellite laboratory. What is being developed today?
Right. Well, you know, when I was a kid growing up in the boonies in North Dakota there, on Sunday after church, the old people, like my parents and their parents, would gather and have coffee and talk. And I kind of eavesdropped on them a little bit. And the theme of a lot of these conversations seemed to be, well, isn't it amazing what they can do these days, someone would say.
Sure.
And I was thinking, well, I don't know, I was too young.
Right.
Well, now I'm old enough in the weather satellite business
You can
that
remember
with
when.
the new generation of weather satellites, I'm starting to say, isn't it amazing what they can do these days? Because it's always improving.
Yes.
Maybe an analogy here is like television. Television started in black and white, then it went to color. Analog signal transitioned to digital here a number of years ago. Standard definition becomes high definition. Right. Well, weather satellites are changing too. First weather satellites went up around 1960, not that long ago. No. It's comparatively young science. And every time a new series of satellites is launched, we learn from the past, so the mad scientists decide, well, we could make the next satellite even better in such and such a respect. Yes. And now the United States is on the verge of launching, or in progress of launching, a series of new geostationary satellites that are better than ever before. Okay. Let's take a look at some of the previews of what these new satellites can do.
Peek inside the lab here, okay.
Yeah, and so we'll peek in, and here are some mad scientists and mad technicians dressed in bunny suits. This is, believe it or not, this is the business end of a weather satellite under construction in a clean room. You don't want a speck of dust on the lens of a weather satellite's camera. So this is done in a clean environment. They are building a geostationary satellite there.
Oh, cool.
This new generation of satellites, if you had to answer the question, why are these better? Why do we care? Okay. You could answer it with 3 words: faster, better, more. The new generation of satellites are faster than the older ones. The images are sharper, they're better, and there's more spectral channels. We'll talk about that.
Any one of these called Steve Austin? It sounds faster, better, stronger.
Yeah. You know what though? These things cost more than $6 million.
Yeah, I'm sure.
They're pricey, but they are an essential tool for the Weather Service to fulfill its mission of protecting lives and property.
Exactly.
You got to have the tool to do the job, and it helps all of us when we get the accurate forecast, the warning in time, and this is the tool. Faster. On left here, we see what the old generation of satellites could scan in 5 minutes. On the right, that's what you get in 5 minutes, the whole planet, or at least one side of it. So it's faster. That means you can take more images over a given amount of time and make smoother movie loops out of that. Because animating movie loops really helps you highlight a feature that maybe you can't see as well in a single image.
Absolutely does, yep.
Let's zoom into a small piece of real estate like Texas.
Sure.
And we can see here a satellite that has a 1-minute movie loop visible light. You can see thunderstorms boiling there.
Yeah, look at that.
Yeah, the rippling of the top of the thunderstorm. This is a fun movie loop. We're going to be able to see things like this more and more often because of the new satellites being generated. Some things are only evident in animation. So that's faster. Well, what's better? We're able to now have sharper imagery than before. The Japanese have a satellite that uses the same imager that is on the new generation of satellites that America is launching too. An imager, that's just a word for camera. It's the camera on a weather satellite. We have something called the Advanced Baseline Imager.
Sounds important.
ABI. It's important enough it has an acronym. Everything's an acronym. Well, an ABI-like instrument is here over the Western Pacific, and we can see this color image. This is what a human eye might see if you were riding on the satellite. But it's a little bit fuzzy. With new technology, you can post-process the image taken by the satellite to highlight and sharpen some of the features. So this image here of the Western Pacific then becomes
Whoa.
this image. Thanks to the
That's a big
processing
difference.
techniques, yes, this is the newest technology. So we've got a new satellite that can provide better data than ever before. And on the ground, we can process it better than before as well to really sharpen up the imagery and to give us a better view of the weather than ever before. So faster and better and more. What do we mean by more? Well, on the older generation of satellites, the imager, the camera, had 5 slices of the spectral pie, visible imagery, infrared imagery, something we can't see from the human eye. A lot of different slices of the pie. We're going from 5. The new imager has 16 slices. Each slice has its own relevance. Some are best for volcanic ash, for smoke, for dust, for telling the difference between smoke and dust, which can look similar under some infrared channels, but other ones bring out certain things. All of these 16 bands are important. In fact, some of the mad scientists, they didn't want 16, they wanted 24. There's always more you can do. But that'll be the next generation of satellites. So now we say, isn't it amazing what we can do these days? And you know what? It makes you think, well, what's the future going to be like too? It's so important to be able to know what's going on now in the weather. If you're going to forecast the future, you got to know where things are now. And satellites are the way to see that, especially in Alaska, where we don't have as many observations down on the ground. The satellites fill in the holes.
Yeah, really important stuff. And I love hearing about what we can see right now, but I love thinking about what is possible in the future. It's amazing stuff. And since you paid for it, it's a good time to learn about it. If you'd like, check out the website at www.goes-r.gov. And as I understand, it's a really easy website to use.
Oh yeah, a lot of good information about what these new satellites mean to Americans. And it's the Weather Service's mission to protect lives and property, and this is the tool how to do it.
Cool stuff, Eric. Thanks so much for sharing that with us today, and thank you for joining us right here in Alaska Weather Facts. We'll see you next time. And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Before we start our marine weather segment, let's go ahead and take a look at the sea ice edge here, and we are starting to see some early ice develop across areas of the Arctic, northwest coast, even down around north side of the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound. This ice, though, is still very early in its stages in development. We're concerned that a strong storm system bringing winds and elevated waves and surf could help to break this up as we come into middle and latter part of the week ahead, later on Wednesday the 5th through Thursday and Friday the 6th and 7th. So stay tuned to later forecasts because there will be impacts across areas of the west central and northwestern coast. Otherwise, across the interior, southeast, inner channels, winds will be north to northwest, about 10 knots there, Petersburg down through Ketchikan, waves a couple of feet. South winds still 15 knots up there through Lynn Canal. And then the outer coast winds will generally be out of the south to southwest, 10 to 15 knots, though more northerly off of Craig with waves of 5 to 6 feet, a few spots 7 feet there north and west of Sitka. Tuesday, look for winds generally out of the north 15 knots inner channels from Lynn Canal down through Petersburg, but still southeast 15 knots with a few foot waves there around Ketchikan and Metlakatla. Offshore easterly winds 20 to 25 knots there for the Gulf Coast with waves running 6 to 7 feet. The northwestern Gulf, we are expecting winds out of the southwest to south 15 knots off the Kenai, waves 6 feet. Generally south winds around 15 knots, Prince William Sound in through mid and upper Cook Inlet with waves running a few feet there. But at the entrance of Cook Inlet, southeast winds of 20 to 25 knots with waves of 6 to 7 feet. And then those winds will be increasing through lower Cook Inlet on Tuesday. 35-knot northeasterly gales with waves building as high as 10 to 12 feet through the lower third there of Cook Inlet, including the entrance. Northeast winds, upper Cook Inlet, waves 6-7 feet, and northeast winds to 20 knots in Prince William Sound with waves of 4 feet. Across Kodiak Island on Monday, south winds to 20 knots, waves 5 feet, Shelikof Strait, 8 feet there out over the western Gulf. And as we extend westward, we expect southeast winds 25 to 30 knots, waves 8 to 10 feet on the North Pacific side, 6 to 8 feet on the Bering side. And for Tuesday, Northeast winds through Shelikof Strait, 30 knots, waves 9 feet. As we go down the peninsula, look for those northeast winds to turn a little more northerly to around 25 knots with waves 8 to 11 feet on the North Pacific side and 7 to 8 feet on the Bering side. Across the eastern and central Aleutians on Monday, look for 35 to 40 knot southwest to west gales. Waves 16 to 19 feet there on the North Pacific side and 14 to 19 feet on the Bering side. And for Tuesday, still winds will shift northwest across the eastern Aleutians, 35 to 40 knot gales there with waves running 12 to 16 feet on the North Pacific side and 14 to 15 feet on the Bering side, and winds eventually turn back toward the southwest to south, as high as 30 knots as you get back toward Kiska with waves 7 to 8 feet there in the western Aleutians. Across the southwest coast into Norton Sound, east winds in Norton Sound, 20 knots, waves 4 feet. We have a low pressure circulation that's just to the east-southeast of St. Paul, St. George. Variable winds there around 15 knots with waves 6-7 feet. And for Tuesday, we expect winds to go more northerly there through the southeast corner of the Bering Sea as a low tracks across the tip of the Alaska Peninsula. Winds will turn north-northwest, generally around 20 knots, but as high as 25 to 30 knots south of Nunavik Island and there in the vicinity of St. Paul and St. George with waves of 7 to 10 feet. Prince William Sound, expect southeast winds 15 knots, waves 3 feet. And then along the Arctic coast, look for east-southeast winds 20-25 knots, waves 4 to 5 feet. Southeast winds Utqiagvik down through Point Hope with waves of 3 to 4 feet. And east to northeast winds through the Bering Strait with waves of 4 to 5 feet. And then finally, on Tuesday, winds will generally have a southerly component there along the Arctic coast at 10 knots with waves running 3 feet. And also southeast winds off of the northwest coast, Point Hope up toward Wainwright, 10 to 15 knots, waves 3 to 5 feet. Westerly winds into Kotzebue Sound with waves of 5 feet, and then northerly winds through the Bering Strait on the north side of St. Lawrence Island with waves running around 4 feet. So that wraps up the show for this Sunday evening. Thank you for joining me, and have a good week ahead.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.